Hi all, my name is Meredith, and I did my philosophical analysis on the educational virtues as taught by Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas was a great thinker in the medieval era, and during that time there was a huge shift as the Roman Empire was following. So the government was moving more from these like really big empires into smaller local governments. So there was more control within the people, and less control that was imperial. So that really shaped some of his thinking, because people were moving closer together. They were living in closer areas. They weren't so spread out in these like huge, vast empires such as the Roman and the Greek empires. So Aquinas was very well educated. He spent a lot of time in university. He came from a very well-educated family. He followed Aristotle's thinking, where a liberal arts education is definitely the most beneficial. But he also was a very religious man, and so Aquinas believed that a combination of intellect and spirituality would be the most beneficial, and that through intellectual reasoning, people would become more spiritual, and that it wasn't this this clashing between intellect and religion, but that the two could actually live in harmony within a human being. As humans had like one big goal, and that was to live in a God-created universe at the end when they died. So Aquinas believed that we have two parts. We have a spiritual part that connects to the supernatural world, and that's our soul, and that is what remains with us once we die. And then he also believed that we connected intellectually to the natural part of the world, and that's what we experience with our five senses. Aquinas did a lot of teaching about over piety and the idea of love thy neighbor, and so that really transcended down into diversity. He preached that differences should be celebrated, and that differences will progress civilization forward, and that people need to be tolerant to others' ideas and also hold strong in their own faith. They need to be able to question, but they also need to use their intellect to reason with what is good and what is evil. He also taught that the very few things are inherently totally good, which means that most things then therefore will have a tiny bit of evil in them. And so it is up to the human being to use their intellect and their critical thinking skills to determine what amount of good is okay, and then what amount of evil are they not willing to accept. So as that applies to education, Aquinas definitely believed in education. He believed in structured teaching. He taught that teachers should be both moral and intellectual guides, and that they should uphold their teachings, and what they're expecting of their students, they should be models of. So as it applies to education today, I think Aquinas' idea of tolerance and of acceptance definitely is something, of course, that all of civilization needs. I work very closely in special education, and so thinking about the movement of inclusion and tolerance, and how I often have to tell my students, I'm not giving you all the same thing. I'm giving you what is fair for each of you to succeed, and for everybody that looks different. Some kids need nothing, and some kids need a lot more support, and my goal isn't to make it my support even. My goal is to make their access even. And so teaching that idea of like loving thy neighbor, of charity, of growth, and of overall human progression, I think is definitely still prevalent in the schools. Also the idea of nourishing both the spiritual or soul side as well as the intellectual side, I've started to see a little bit more. The idea of mindfulness, of compassion. There's definitely that progress and that shift is happening in schools, of kind of looking at students as a whole student and not just looking at them intellectually. So I found Aquinas to be an incredibly interesting thinker, and I think even though his philosophies came about over 1,000 years ago, there are still definitely very key elements that can be used in today's education. Thanks.